The television screen flickered with a brilliant, blinding light, casting sharp, dancing shadows across the cramped living room of the Midoriya apartment. On the screen, a man with impossibly broad shoulders and a smile that seemed to defy the very concept of despair stood amidst the wreckage of a burning city. He was carrying a dozen people on his back, his laughter booming through the cheap speakers of the TV set. "Fear not, citizens. Hope has arrived. Because I am here." 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya stared at the screen, his emerald eyes wide, reflecting the vibrant colors of the broadcast. Beside him sat Katsuki Bakugo, his spiky ash-blonde hair practically vibrating with excitement. Katsuki already had his quirk. It had manifested a few weeks ago, turning his sweat into a nitroglycerin-like substance that popped and cracked like firecrackers in his tiny palms. He was already the king of the playground, the undisputed future #1 hero. Izuku, however, was still waiting. "I'm gonna be even better than All Might," Katsuki declared, holding up his hands as tiny sparks leaped off his skin, smelling faintly of burnt sugar and ozone. "My explosions are gonna blast every villain into space." "What are you gonna do, Izuku? If you don't get a quirk soon, you're gonna be stuck as a nobody." There was no malice in Katsuki's voice yet, only the blunt, unfiltered arrogance of a child who knew he was special. Izuku frowned, clutching his knees to his chest. He wanted a quirk. He wanted to be a hero. He wanted it so badly that his chest physically ached with the desire. "I'll get one, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice quiet but stubborn. "I'm going to save people, just like him." He looked at the limited edition All Might action figure sitting on the coffee table. It belonged to Katsuki. Izuku had asked his mother Inko for one, but they were sold out everywhere. He stared at the toy. He looked at its articulated joints, the shiny metallic paint on the belt, the specific molding of the plastic polymer that made up the hero's grinning face. He had stared at it so intensely over the last hour that he felt he knew every millimeter of its construction. He knew how the spring in the shoulder joint allowed the arm to raise. He understood the hollow space inside the chest cavity to save on manufacturing costs. "I wish I had one," Izuku thought. "I want it. I know exactly what it is." A strange sensation washed over him. It started at the base of his skull, a sudden, sharp warmth that cascaded down his spine and pooled in his stomach. His heart accelerated, thumping wildly against his ribs. Suddenly, he felt ravenously hungry, as if he hadn't eaten in days. The warmth in his stomach traveled down his arms, settling into the palms of his hands. His fingertips began to tingle. Then they glowed. A brilliant, ethereal blue-white light flared from Izuku's hands, blinding Katsuki, who let out a startled yelp and shielded his eyes. The light didn't burn, but it carried a strange weight, a hum of displaced air and crackling static. Izuku couldn't close his eyes. He was paralyzed by the sensation of something pulling from inside him, drawing from his very energy reserves. In his mind's eye, a blueprint appeared. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a sudden, violent download of information. He saw the molecular structure of the cheap polyvinyl chloride plastic. He saw the steel composition of the tiny internal springs. He saw the chemical makeup of the red, blue, and yellow paint. With a sound like a sharp intake of breath, the light vanished. Izuku slumped forward, suddenly exhausted, his head throbbing with a dull, localized ache behind his eyes. He gasped for air, his tiny hands trembling. "What the heck was that?" Katsuki yelled, dropping his defensive posture. He blinked away the spots in his vision, looking at his friend. Then Katsuki froze. His crimson eyes widened in absolute shock. Sitting perfectly in Izuku's trembling, soot-stained hands was an All Might action figure. It wasn't a cheap knockoff. It wasn't a lump of deformed plastic. It was a flawless, one-to-one replica of the limited edition toy sitting on the coffee table. The paint was pristine, the joints were perfect, and it even had the tiny, molded copyright text on the bottom of the left boot. Izuku stared at the toy in his hands. He dropped it onto the tatami mat, where it landed with a hollow plastic clack. I made it," Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. He touched his nose, feeling a wet trickle. He pulled his fingers away to see a smear of bright red blood. Inko Midoriya, having heard Katsuki's yell, rushed into the living room from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Izuku? Katsuki? What happened? Are you? She stopped, her eyes darting from the bloody nose of her son to the glowing, residual energy fading from his palms, and finally to the two identical All Might toys sitting on the floor. Katsuki looked from the toy, to his own popping, sparking hands, and then up to Izuku. The childish superiority in Katsuki's eyes fractured, replaced by a sudden, intense realization. The boy he had deemed ordinary had just pulled matter out of thin air. Izuku Midoriya was not a nobody. Dr. Kudaigaraki, or rather, the pediatrician acting as the local Quirk specialist, adjusted his round glasses, looking over the clipboard in his hands. He was a bald, eccentric-looking man with a thick mustache, and he hummed thoughtfully as he reviewed Izuku's X-rays. 7-year-old Izuku sat on the examination table, swinging his legs, munching aggressively on a high-calorie protein bar. His mother, Inko, sat in the chair beside him, wringing her hands nervously. "Well, Mrs. Midoriya," the doctor began, turning the X-ray to face her. "Your son is quite the anomaly. As you can see, he lacks the extra joint in his pinky toe, which is the universal genetic marker for Quirk manifestation. We knew he would develop one, but the nature of it is entirely unprecedented. Is something wrong with him?" Inko asked, her voice tight with worry. "He gets these terrible headaches whenever he uses it, and his nose bleeds. And he's always so hungry." The doctor chuckled, though there was a clinical coldness to his eyes. "Nothing is wrong with him, Mrs. Midoriya. In fact, he possesses one of the most powerful and complex quirks I have ever documented. I've officially classified it as an emitter/mutant hybrid. We are calling it Omniforge, though perfect creation might be a more apt colloquialism." The doctor turned to Izuku. "Izuku, my boy. Show me the block again." Izuku swallowed the bite of his protein bar. He closed his eyes. On the table sat a complex, multicolored Rubik's Cube. Izuku had spent the last 20 minutes staring at it, turning it over in his hands, popping out a piece to examine the internal spherical core and the springs that allowed the pieces to pivot. Izuku took a deep breath. He held out his hand. The blue-white light flared, accompanied by the smell of ozone. The light coalesced, solidifying into matter. A second later, a perfect, working replica of the Rubik's Cube dropped into Izuku's palm. Izuku swayed slightly, pressing 2 fingers to his temple as a wince crossed his face. The doctor clapped his hands together. "Fascinating. Simply fascinating. You see, Mrs. Midoriya, your son is not violating the laws of physics, though it appears that way. His body is acting as a hyper-advanced biological 3D printer." Inko looked bewildered. I don't understand. To create matter from nothing is impossible," the doctor explained, pacing the room. "Izuku is drawing on 2 sources to fuel his creations. The first is ambient energy from the environment, heat, static electricity, light. The second, and more taxing source, is his own body. He converts his own lipids, caloric intake, and physical stamina into raw atomic material. That explains the hunger and the exhaustion," Inko murmured, looking at Izuku with deep concern. "Exactly. But the physical toll is only half the equation," the doctor continued, tapping his own temple. "The reason he gets migraines and nosebleeds is due to the neurological strain. In order to create an object, Izuku must understand it completely." Izuku looked up, nodding eagerly. "If I don't know how it works, it comes out wrong. Yesterday I tried to make a wristwatch, but I didn't know how the gears fit together. It just came out as a solid lump of metal and glass." "Precisely," the doctor smiled, a little too widely. "His brain acts as a supercomputer. When he activates his quirk, his mind is forced to consciously and subconsciously map out the atomic structure, the physics, and the mechanics of the object he wishes to manifest. The more complex the object, the more processing power required. If he attempts to create something too complicated, or if he creates too many things in rapid succession, his brain quite literally overheats. The blood vessels in his nasal cavity rupture from the sudden spike in blood pressure, leading to the nosebleeds. If he pushes too hard, he could induce an aneurysm." Inko gasped, covering her mouth. "An aneurysm? You mean he could die from using his quirk?" "Only if he is incredibly foolish," the doctor reassured her quickly. "The body has natural fail-safes. He would likely pass out from the pain and exhaustion long before permanent damage occurs. However, if he intends to use this quirk extensively, he must do two things. First, he must eat a massive amount of calories to sustain his lipid reserves. Second, he needs to study. His quirk is limited only by his intellect and his stamina. As they left the clinic that day, Inko held Izuku's hand tightly. She was terrified. She had wanted her son to be special, but a quirk that could literally fry his brain if he wasn't careful? It was a heavy burden. Izuku, however, was not afraid. As they walked home beneath the twilight sky, his mind was racing. Limited only by his intellect. If he wanted to be a hero, he couldn't just rely on punching things. He couldn't just create swords or shields. Anyone could break those. If he wanted to stand beside All Might, if he wanted to prove to Katsuki that he was a true rival, he needed to become the smartest person in the room. He needed to understand the world down to its very atoms. The dynamic between Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo did not follow the tragic, bullying trajectory that so often befell the quirkless. When Izuku manifested Omniforge, Katsuki did not view him as a pebble on the side of the road. He viewed him as a threat. Katsuki's quirk, Explosion, was sheer, devastating, kinetic power. It was instinctual, raw, and overwhelmingly dominant. Katsuki didn't have to think to destroy, he just had to sweat and ignite. Izuku's quirk was the exact opposite. It was cold, calculated, and entirely dependent on preparation. By the time they were 10 years old, the playground had become their personal testing ground. Katsuki would boast about a new move he had developed, blowing apart old oil drums in the abandoned lots near their neighborhood. Izuku would sit on the sidelines, surrounded by open encyclopedias and a massive, thick notebook labeled Blueprint Analysis No. 3. "Hey, Deku!" Katsuki yelled one afternoon, smoke curling from his palms. Deku was a nickname Katsuki had coined years ago, meaning one who can't do anything. It had started as an insult when they thought Izuku was quirkless, but after the manifestation, Katsuki kept it as an ironic, grating challenge. "Are you just gonna read your stupid books all day, or are you gonna fight me?" Izuku looked up from a textbook on basic metallurgy. He pushed his round glasses up his nose, a recent addition to his wardrobe, prescribed after his excessive reading had slightly strained his eyesight. "I'm not reading stupid books, Kaken," Izuku said calmly, his voice devoid of the stuttering fear he might have possessed in another life. He possessed the quiet confidence of a boy who knew he held an entire arsenal in his mind. "I'm studying the tensile strength of titanium alloy matrices. Your explosions generate approximately 3,000 degrees Celsius at the epicenter. Standard steel melts at 1,370 degrees. If I make a steel shield, you'll melt through it in 3 seconds and blow off my arm." Katsuki clicked his tongue, glaring at him. "So what? You're too scared?" Izuku sighed, closing the book. He stood up, dusting off his shorts. "I'm saying I had to find a workaround." Izuku raised his right arm. He closed his eyes, his brow furrowing in intense concentration. The air around him dropped in temperature, as his quirk violently siphoned ambient thermal energy to fuel the creation. The familiar, blinding blue-white light erupted from his forearm. The smell of ozone and burning calories filled the air. When the light faded, Izuku's right arm was encased in a sleek, beautifully engineered hexagonal shield. It wasn't just a slab of metal. It was a multi-layered composite of carbon fiber and titanium alloy, backed by a shock-absorbing synthetic gel layer. Izuku winced, a brief flash of pain crossing his eyes as he wiped a single drop of blood from his left nostril. He settled into a defensive stance. "All right, Kaken. Hit me." Katsuki grinned, a feral, terrifying expression. "Don't cry when I break your new toy, Deku." Katsuki lunged forward, using explosions from his feet to propel himself at breakneck speed. He twisted in the air, bringing his right palm forward, aiming a massive, concentrated blast directly at Izuku's center of mass. Boom! The shockwave rattled the windows of the nearby buildings. Smoke and dust billowed into the air, obscuring the boys from view. Katsuki landed gracefully, a smug smirk on his face. "Told you, nothing can beat my firepower." As the smoke cleared, however, Katsuki's smirk vanished. Izuku was pushed back several feet, his shoes having dug twin trenches into the dirt. But he was standing. The hexagonal shield was scorched black, and thin spiderweb cracks ran through the outer titanium layer, but it had held. The shock-absorbing gel had distributed the kinetic force, saving Izuku's arm from shattering. Izuku lowered the shield, panting heavily, sweat dripping down his face. Titanium, carbon composite, he breathed, a triumphant smile breaking across his face. It worked. Katsuki stared at the unbroken shield, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and profound frustration. No matter how strong he got, Deku was always there, building a new wall to stop him. Deku didn't have super strength or speed. Physically, he was average. But his mind was a fortress. You think you're so smart, Katsuki snarled, turning his back and walking away. Next time, I'll blow you and your shield to ash. Keep building, Deku. It just means I have to hit harder. I'll be ready, Kaken. Izuku called after him, releasing his quirk. The shield dissolved into harmless, dissipating energy motes, returning to the ether. Izuku immediately reached into his backpack, pulling out a high-calorie nutrition shake and downing it in seconds to stave off the impending crash. He pulled out his notebook and a pencil. Test 42, Carbon Titanium Matrix. Result, successful against localized blast. Issue, weight is too heavy for prolonged mobility. Need to research aerogels and graphene alternatives. Izuku's childhood became a blur of relentless, obsessive study. While other children played video games, Izuku took apart the gaming consoles to understand their circuitry. While other kids watched hero cartoons, Izuku watched documentaries on chemical engineering, fluid dynamics, and advanced ballistics. He lived at the local library, consuming information at a terrifying rate. His bedroom became less of a boy's sanctuary and more of a mad scientist's laboratory. Posters of All Might still adorned the walls, but they were now surrounded by blueprints of support gear, chemical formulas scrawled on whiteboards, and half-disassembled household appliances. Inko did her best to support him, buying him the collegiate-level textbooks he requested for his birthdays, and ensuring the pantry was always stocked with the densest, most calorically rich foods available. But she worried. She watched her son push his brain to the brink, sometimes finding him asleep at his desk, his notebook stained with drops of blood from his overexerted nasal capillaries. Izuku, she had told him one night, gently brushing his curly green hair as he iced his forehead after trying to comprehend the mechanics of a jet turbine. You don't have to push yourself so hard. You're already so smart. Izuku had looked at her, his emerald eyes burning with an unyielding fire. I have to, Mom. A sword is only as sharp as the whetstone that grinds it. If I want to be a hero who can save everyone with a smile, my mind has to be an unstoppable forge. I can't afford to not know how the world works. Age 14. Aldera Junior High. The classroom was a cacophony of adolescent chatter as the homeroom teacher walked to the front of the room, holding a thick stack of papers. Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures, the teacher announced, his voice barely cutting through the noise. He dramatically threw the stack of papers into the air, letting them scatter across the floor. I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right? The classroom erupted into cheers. Students activated their quirks, stretching limbs, shooting small jets of water, manifesting minor illusions. It was a display of mediocre, average powers. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks, the teacher sighed. But remember, using your powers in school is against the rules. Sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers. The loud, grating voice of Katsuki Bakugo silenced the room. He sat with his feet propped up on his desk, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. They'll be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some busted D-lister. I'm the real deal. The class instantly turned on him, shouting insults, but Bakugo merely laughed, small explosions popping in his palms. Bring it on, extras! I've aced all the mock tests. I'm the only one at this school who stands a chance at getting into UA High School. I'm going to surpass All Might and become the top hero, and my name will be carved into the list of top earners. The teacher adjusted his glasses, looking at his clipboard. Oh, right. Bakugo, you're going for UA High, aren't you? Murmurs of "oh" rippled through the class. UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is insanely low. That's right. Bakugo stood up, basking in the attention. I'm going to be the only one from this crappy middle school to make it to the big leagues. Midoriya, the teacher added casually, flipping a page. You're applying for UA too, right? The room went dead silent. All eyes slowly turned to the back of the classroom. Izuku Midoriya was entirely ignoring the commotion. He sat at his desk, wearing a pair of high-magnification jeweler's goggles, using a pair of tweezers to meticulously assemble the microscopic internal firing mechanism of a localized EMP grenade. A half-eaten box of high-calorie protein bars sat next to his massive, leather-bound notebook titled Blueprint Anthology Volume 14. Izuku didn't look up. He carefully placed a microscopic copper coil into the housing. Yes, sensei. The hero course. The class didn't laugh at him. They didn't dare. They remembered the time in first year when a senior student had tried to bully Izuku, and within 3 seconds, Izuku had created a non-lethal, high-voltage taser gauntlet, and dropped the bully to the floor, twitching and foaming at the mouth, all while calmly explaining the amperage required to induce muscular paralysis without stopping a human heart. Izuku was the school's resident mad genius. He was quiet, polite, and terrifyingly competent. Bakugo, however, slammed his hands onto his desk, blowing it in half with a loud explosion. Deku! He roared. Izuku finally paused. He pushed his goggles up onto his forehead, sighing softly. He looked at Bakugo, his expression neutral. Good morning, Kaken. You're going to have to pay for that desk. Shut up! Bakugo stomped over, kicking the debris aside. He leaned over Izuku's desk, his eyes burning with fury. You think you can compete with me? With your little toys? Yue doesn't want an engineer in the hero course. They want power. Yue wants results, Kaken, Izuku replied evenly, closing his notebook so Bakugo couldn't see the schematics. Power is just one vector of success. Tactical adaptability is another. My toys, as you call them, are just extensions of my will. You have explosions. I have everything else. You cocky bastard, Bakugo snarled, grabbing Izuku by the collar of his uniform. You still get nosebleeds if you think too hard. In a real fight, a villain won't give you 10 minutes to build a damn shield. I'll crush you in the entrance exam. Izuku didn't flinch. He reached up, his fingers lightly gripping Bakugo's wrist. The blue-white light flared instantly. Before Bakugo could react, a perfectly fitted, heavy-duty tungsten shackle materialized around Bakugo's wrist, pinning his hand to the metal frame of Izuku's desk with an audible clang. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock. He tried to pull his arm away, but the tungsten held firm. Reaction time, 0.4 seconds, Izuku noted aloud, reaching into his pocket for a tissue to dab the slight trickle of blood escaping his left nostril. I don't need 10 minutes, Kaken. I just need to see you coming. Izuku stood up, slinging his heavy backpack over his shoulder. He tapped the shackle. That's a solid tungsten carbide alloy. Your explosions will eventually melt it, but it'll take you about 10 minutes of continuous blasting. Try not to set off the fire alarms. Leaving Bakugo screaming obscenities and blasting the metal desk, Izuku quietly walked out of the classroom, popping another protein bar into his mouth. The walk home from school was usually Izuku's time to decompress. Creating the tungsten shackle had been a minor flex, but tungsten had a very complex atomic density. His head throbbed with a low-grade migraine. He needed to rest his brain before he started his evening workout routine. If he was going to survive the physical backlash of his quirk at UA, he needed a body that wouldn't collapse from exhaustion. He decided to take a shortcut under the bridge. The shadows were deep, the air cool and damp. Izuku was muttering to himself, running through the mathematical formulas for localized gyroscopic stabilization. If I angle the thrusters at a 45-degree trajectory, the recoil should theoretically counterbalance the weight of the armor plating. A strange gurgling sound interrupted his thoughts. Izuku stopped. He looked up. Emerging from the manhole cover a few yards ahead was a horrific sight. It was a massive, undulating mass of dark green sludge, smelling of sewage and rotting garbage. 2 massive eyes and a jagged mouth floated within the viscous fluid, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. The sludge villain gurgled, its eyes locking onto Izuku. Perfect. You look like a sturdy kid. Give me your body. The villain lunged, a wave of sickening sludge surging forward to engulf Izuku. Izuku didn't scream. His mind, trained by a decade of relentless analysis, instantly slowed down the world around him. His analytical brain overrode his fear, compartmentalizing the threat. Threat assessment: biological fluid-based villain. Standard blunt force trauma will be ineffective. Physical restraint is impossible due to non-Newtonian fluid properties. Suffocation risk, extreme. Countermeasure required: extreme acoustic disruption to destabilize fluid cohesion, or rapid desiccation. Izuku took a step back, widening his stance. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He pulled heavily on his stamina, his stomach clenching with sudden, agonizing hunger. The blue-white light erupted from his hands, illuminating the dark underpass. Blueprint 12, high-frequency sonic emitter. The villain recoiled slightly at the light, but kept coming. What the hell? A flashy quirk? Doesn't matter, you're mine. Before the sludge could touch him, Izuku thrust his hands forward. Clutched in his palms was a sleek, silver, cylindrical device the size of a soda can. He twisted the top dial and hurled it directly into the center of the villain's mass. Eat this, Izuku commanded, covering his ears and opening his mouth to equalize the pressure in his eardrums. The emitter detonated. It wasn't an explosion of fire. It was an explosion of sound. A devastating, high-decibel sonic wave, perfectly calibrated to the resonant frequency of water, blasted through the tunnel. The concrete cracked. The sludge villain shrieked in absolute agony. The acoustic waves disrupted the surface tension of his liquid body, causing him to violently splatter and lose form. The sludge sloughed off in massive chunks, vibrating violently. Ack! My ears! What is this? The villain screamed, unable to reform his body. Izuku dropped to one knee, panting heavily. The migraine flared violently, feeling like an ice pick driven into his skull. Blood poured freely from both nostrils, staining his uniform collar. He had created the device too fast. Suddenly, a massive figure burst from the manhole cover, blowing the heavy iron lid high into the air. Fear not, kid! A booming voice echoed over the ringing in Izuku's ears. Because I am here. Izuku looked up, his vision swimming. Standing there, practically glowing with sheer muscular presence, was All Might. The #1 hero. He looked exactly like the action figure Izuku had created all those years ago, only larger than life. All Might looked at the splattered, vibrating villain, and then down at the metallic device emitting the sonic waves. He quickly deduced what had happened. With a mighty roar, All Might pulled his fist back. Texas. Smash! The wind pressure generated by the punch was unfathomable. It created a localized tornado within the tunnel, gathering the disrupted sludge and slamming it violently against the wall, knocking the villain completely unconscious. The sheer force of the wind blew Izuku backward, sending him tumbling across the concrete. The sonic emitter was crushed in the crossfire, the deafening noise finally ceasing. Silence descended on the underpass, save for Izuku's heavy breathing. Well, well! All Might boomed, turning to Izuku with a massive grin. He pulled 2 empty 2-liter soda bottles from his cargo pants and began scooping up the unconscious villain. That was some quick thinking, young man. I was chasing this villain across town, but it seems you had the situation perfectly under control. An acoustic disruptor? Brilliant! Izuku stared at his idol. The man he had admired since he was a toddler. Most kids would have fainted. Most kids would have run up and begged for an autograph. Izuku reached into his pocket, pulled out a tissue, wiped the blood from his face, and pulled out his notebook. Observation: All Might's wind pressure. The sheer kinetic energy required to generate a vortex capable of moving a liquid mass of that volume implies a muscular density far exceeding theoretical human limits. He isn't just strong. His muscles act as localized pneumatic cannons. Young man? All Might asked, blinking in confusion as the green-haired boy furiously scribbled in a notebook. Izuku looked up. Sorry. All Might, sir. It's an honor to meet you. Your response time was incredible, but your spatial awareness in an enclosed area like this could have caused structural damage to the overpass above us if you had angled that punch 3 degrees higher. All Might froze, staring at the middle schooler. Did this kid just critique my smash? Ha! A keen eye. All Might laughed loudly, though a bit awkwardly, as he securely capped the bottles containing the villain. I'll keep that in mind. Now, I must be off to deliver this evildoer to the police. Keep up the good work, my boy. You have the mind of a hero. All Might crouched, his leg muscles bulging, and leaped into the air, flying out of the tunnel and into the city skyline. Izuku watched him go, a small, genuine smile on his face. He had met All Might. And he hadn't needed rescuing. He had defended himself. He looked down at his trembling, blood-stained hands. He was getting stronger. His mind was getting sharper. But the day was far from over. 15 minutes later, Izuku was walking through the Tatooine shopping district, munching on his third protein bar, when a massive explosion rocked the street. Black smoke plumed into the sky, accompanied by the screams of terrified civilians. Heat washed over the area, and the smell of burning plastic and shattered glass filled the air. Izuku's hero instincts kicked in. He ran toward the commotion, pushing through the gathering crowd. What he saw made his blood run cold. The shopping district was a war zone. Fires raged out of control, consuming storefronts. Standing in the center of the inferno was the sludge villain. How? Izuku thought, his mind racing. All Might had him. He must have dropped the bottles. My sonic emitter weakened him, but the kinetic force of All Might's punch might have compromised the structural integrity of the plastic bottles. But that wasn't the worst part. The sludge villain had a hostage. He was wrapping his thick, mucus-like body around the struggling figure, suffocating him. Explosions were going off wildly inside the sludge. Kaken. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. Bakugo was trapped. His face was contorted in agony, struggling to breathe as the sludge forced its way into his mouth and nose. He was using his quirk in a panic, blasting explosions in every direction. Damn it! I can't get near him! The pro-hero Death Arm shouted, shielding his face from an explosion. The kid is using his quirk indiscriminately. It's too dangerous. My wood will catch fire. Kamui Woods yelled, retreating from the flames. We need a hero with a water or ice quirk. Empty Lady is too big to fit in this street. We just have to wait for backup. Wait for backup? Izuku's mind analyzed the situation with cold, terrifying precision. Bakugo's lung capacity under extreme stress, approximately 45 seconds before hypoxia sets in. Brain damage occurs at 3 minutes. The pros are acting defensively. They are assessing the risk to themselves over the life of the hostage. Unacceptable. Izuku looked at the roaring fire. He looked at the villain. He looked at Bakugo's terrified, desperate red eyes. Before he could consciously process his actions, Izuku's legs moved. He dropped his heavy backpack and sprinted past the police barricade. Hey! Kid! Stop! Are you crazy? Death Arms roared, reaching for him. Izuku didn't hear him. The world muted. The roar of the fire, the screams of the crowd, the explosions, they all faded into white noise. Izuku was in the zone. His mind, the ultimate forge, ignited. Problem: intense heat, uncooperative hostage, fluid-based enemy, lack of oxygen. Solution: instantaneous cryogenic freezing combined with pneumatic extraction. As he ran toward the inferno, Izuku threw his hands out. He didn't have time to worry about his brain. He needed to build. He pulled on every ounce of caloric energy he had consumed that day. The blue-white light that erupted from his arms was blinding, almost outshining the fires around him. The migraine hit him like a freight train. It was so intense his vision went red. Blood burst from his nose, painting his chin, but he didn't stop. He screamed, forcing his mind to visualize the complex chemistry and mechanics required. Blueprint 88, nitrogen core grenade, ammonium nitrate, pressurized casing, impact trigger. In his right hand a heavy, frost-covered spherical grenade materialized. Blueprint 112, pneumatic vacuum cylinder, titanium alloy, high-torque suction turbine, reverse pressure valve. In his left hand, a massive, 2-foot-long cylindrical tube with a wide nozzle formed, heavy and humming with potential energy. Izuku skidded to a halt 10 feet from the villain, the heat blistering his skin. You again? The sludge villain roared, recognizing the boy who had caused him so much pain. I'll kill you this time, Deku! Bakugo choked out, his eyes wide with shock as he saw the blood pouring down Izuku's face. Hold your breath, Kaken! Izuku commanded, his voice unnervingly calm despite his agonizing pain. Izuku threw the grenade with flawless precision. It didn't hit the villain's body. It hit the ground directly beneath the villain's eyes and mouth. The grenade shattered. There was no fiery explosion. Instead, a massive, instantaneous dome of hyperpressurized liquid nitrogen erupted outward. The temperature in the immediate vicinity plummeted to negative 196 degrees Celsius in a fraction of a second. The sludge villain didn't even have time to scream. The fluid around its face, eyes, and the area holding Bakugo flash froze into solid, brittle, green ice. The fire immediately surrounding them was snuffed out by the extreme lack of oxygen and sudden temperature drop. The villain's grip on Bakugo shattered like glass. Bakugo fell to his hands and knees on the freezing pavement, gasping violently for air, hacking up sludge. The rest of the villain's body, which hadn't been directly hit by the blast, began to violently thrash in panic, trying to retreat into the sewers. Oh no you don't, Izuku growled. He stepped forward, leveling the massive titanium cylinder in his left hand. He pulled the heavy trigger lever. The internal turbine whirred to life with a deafening screech. It created a localized, overwhelming vacuum force. The unfrozen, semi-liquid portions of the sludge villain were violently ripped from the ground, sucked into the nozzle, and compressed into the reinforced titanium chamber of the cylinder. Within 5 seconds the street was clear of the villain. The only thing left was the frozen chunks of its face, and Bakugo, coughing violently on the ground. Izuku released the trigger. The cylinder hummed down. He twisted the safety valve, sealing the villain inside. Silence fell over the shopping district. The fire still crackled, but the threat was entirely neutralized. The pro-heroes stood perfectly still, their jaws slack. A middle schooler had just analyzed, engaged, and defeated a villain that had stalled 4 registered professionals, all in under 20 seconds. Izuku stood there for a moment. He looked at the heavy cylinder in his hand. He looked at Bakugo, who was staring up at him with a mixture of horror, awe, and furious pride. Then, Izuku's eyes rolled into the back of his head. The neurological strain had finally breached his limit. The blue light flickered and died. The titanium cylinder and the remaining ice from the grenade vanished into thin air, dropping the unconscious sludge villain onto the pavement in a helpless puddle. Izuku collapsed backward, plummeting into darkness. Before he hit the ground, a massive, muscular arm caught him. All Might had arrived, having pushed through his own limits to reach the scene. He looked down at the bleeding, unconscious boy in his arms. He looked at the defeated villain. He looked at the pro-heroes who had done nothing. A hero who creates his own miracles, All Might thought, his heart pounding with profound respect. He didn't have power. He built it. In the blink of an eye, he built exactly what was needed to save a life. You idiot, Bakugo rasped, struggling to stand. He wiped his mouth, glaring at Izuku's unconscious form. I didn't need your damn gadgets, Deku. But his voice lacked its usual venom. His hands were shaking. He knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Izuku had just saved his life with a level of tactical genius he couldn't comprehend. The paramedics rushed the scene, taking Izuku from All Might's arms. As they loaded the green-haired boy into the ambulance, All Might stood in the center of the wreckage, his mind made up. He had been looking for a successor. Someone to inherit One for All. But looking at Izuku Midoriya, All Might realized something fundamental. This boy didn't need One for All. Giving him a power that broke bones would only hinder the beautiful, terrifying intellect he already possessed. No, this boy didn't need raw power. He needed guidance. He needed resources. He needed stamina. All Might looked up at the sky, the smoke clearing to reveal the setting sun. Izuku Midoriya, All Might whispered to the wind. You are going to forge a new era. Izuku woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. He blinked, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room making his head throb. His nose was packed with gauze, and an N4 drip was attached to his arm, pumping saline and a high-calorie glucose solution into his veins. Izuku! Inko Midoriya was at his bedside in an instant, tears streaming down her face. She threw her arms around him, sobbing uncontrollably. Oh, my baby! You terrified me. The police called, they said you jumped into a fire. What were you thinking, Mom? I'm okay, Izuku mumbled, his voice hoarse. I had the math right. I knew the thermodynamic threshold of the villain. It was safe. Safe? You passed out from a severe migraine. Your lipid levels dropped dangerously low. Inko scolded, though she was holding his hand tightly, kissing his knuckles. Before Izuku could respond, the door to the hospital room opened. A tall, painfully thin man with messy blonde hair and sunken blue eyes walked in. He wore a ridiculously oversized suit. Inko wiped her tears, standing up. Oh, excuse me. Are you a detective? The man coughed into his hand, a speck of blood appearing on his palm. Ah, no, ma'am. Not exactly. Could I have a moment alone with young Midoriya? It concerns the incident today. Inko looked hesitant, but Izuku nodded. It's okay, Mom. I'm awake. Reluctantly, Inko stepped out, closing the door behind her. The skeletal man walked to the foot of Izuku's bed. He looked the boy up and down, a small smile playing on his lips. You took quite a risk today, young man. The pro-heroes were giving you quite the scolding while you were unconscious. They said you acted recklessly? That you endangered yourself and the hostage. Izuku frowned, looking down at his hands. They were waiting for a hero with a specific quirk. But the villain was suffocating Kaken. My calculations showed he had less than a minute. I didn't have time to wait for the perfect quirk. I had to build it, the man chuckled. Exactly. You didn't wait for a miracle. You forged one. You analyzed the situation, recognized the failure of the professionals, and executed a flawless, tactical rescue. Izuku looked up, squinting at the man. There was something familiar about his sharp blue eyes. Who are you? The man sighed, a puff of steam rising from his body. I suppose I should show you. In a fraction of a second, the skeletal man expanded, his muscles inflating like balloons. The oversized suit suddenly fit perfectly across a massive, barrel chest. The sunken face transformed into a chiseled jawline, adorned with an unmistakable, blinding smile. I am here! All Might boomed, though he kept his voice reasonably low for the hospital setting. Izuku's jaw dropped, straining the gauze in his nose. All Might? You're what? With another puff of steam, All Might deflated back into the skeletal man, coughing violently. He wiped his mouth, looking at Izuku seriously. A fake form. An injury I sustained years ago limits my hero work. But that is a secret for another time, All Might said, pulling up a chair and sitting beside Izuku's bed. I came here to tell you something, Izuku Midoriya. When I saw you sprint into that fire, when I saw you push your own body to the absolute breaking point, not with brute force, but with sheer, unyielding intellect to save a life, it inspired me. Izuku's eyes welled with tears. To hear these words from his idol, it was everything he had ever worked for. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. All Might continued, his voice soft but filled with immense gravity. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku sniffled, nodding. My mind moved before my body. I saw the blueprint. Yes, All Might smiled. You have a quirk that the world has never seen. Perfect creation. But a quirk is just a tool. It is the mind that wields it that makes a hero. Midoriya, you can become a hero. In fact, you can become the greatest. Izuku broke down, sobbing into his hands. All the years of studying, all the bloody noses, all the migraines, all of Bakugo's taunts, it had all been worth it. All Might placed a large, calloused hand on Izuku's shoulder. However, All Might said, his tone shifting to that of a strict teacher. Your physical vessel is lacking. Your brain is writing checks your body cannot cash. If you enter UA high school in this state, you will fry your own nervous system trying to keep up with the physical demands of the hero course. Izuku looked up, wiping his eyes. I know. My stamina is my biggest bottleneck. I need to be stronger. I need more endurance to fuel the creations. All Might stood up, a fierce determination in his eyes. The UA entrance exam is 10 months away. I am going to offer you a proposition, young Midoriya. I will not give you a new quirk. You do not need one, but I will give you my time. I will train your physical body. I will push you to your absolute limits. We will build a body capable of sustaining that incredible mind of yours. Izuku stared at the number one hero. He wasn't just being acknowledged. He was being taken on as a disciple. Will you accept my training, Izuku Midoriya? All Might asked, extending a hand. Izuku didn't hesitate. He reached out, his hand wrapping around All Might's. His grip was firm, his emerald eyes burning with an unshakable resolve. Yes, Izuku said, his voice steady. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll build a body that won't break. I'll forge a path to the top. All Might smiled. Good. Rest up, kid. Because starting tomorrow, we begin constructing the ultimate hero from the ground up. As All Might left the room, Izuku leaned back against his pillows. His head still throbbed, and his body was exhausted, but his mind had never been clearer. He closed his eyes. He didn't see darkness. He saw lines of code, chemical formulas, and structural integrity graphs. He saw the future. He opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling. Blueprint number 1 for UA High School, Izuku thought to himself. Project: become the number 1 hero. Status: in production. The scent of salt, rotting seaweed, and decades of oxidized metal hung heavy over Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across mountains of illegal dumping. Refrigerators, rusted cars, shattered televisions, and unidentifiable husks of industrial machinery formed a labyrinth of urban decay against the backdrop of the crashing ocean. In the center of this metallic wasteland, 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya was screaming. His hands were blistered, wrapped in coarse athletic tape that was already fraying. His legs burned as if battery acid had been injected directly into his calves. He was attempting to pull a waterlogged, cast-iron safe across the wet, yielding sand using nothing but a thick hemp rope slung over his shoulder. Lower your center of gravity. You're pulling with your back, young Midoriya. Use your legs. The quads are the largest muscle group in the human body. Sitting atop a rusted washing machine 10 feet away was All Might in his skeletal, deflated form. He was wearing an oversized yellow tracksuit, blowing a silver whistle with alarming enthusiasm. Izuku gritted his teeth, his boots digging into the sand. He dropped his hips, adjusting the fulcrum of his leverage, and pushed off his heels. The safe groaned against the sand, moving a grand total of 6 inches. Izuku collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, sweat pouring from his brow and stinging his eyes. I moved it, Izuku panted, his chest heaving violently. 6 inches. All Might called out, hopping down from the washing machine. Only 3,000 more inches to go until you reach the drop-off point. Here. All Might tossed a massive, full-wrapped brick toward the boy. Izuku caught it clumsily. It was a specially formulated, 5,000-calorie nutrient bar created by a support company All Might had connections with. It tasted like chalk and peanut butter, but to Izuku's metabolically starved body, it was a lifeline. He tore into it, chewing aggressively. 10 months, All Might said, pacing around the boy. That is all the time we have before the UA entrance exam. Right now your Quirk, Omniforge, is a beautifully engineered sports car, but your body is a rusted-out lawnmower engine. If you rev it too high it explodes. The creation of complex matter requires an astronomical amount of biological fuel. Lipids, proteins, glycogen. But more importantly, it requires physical endurance to withstand the neurological shockwave. Izuku swallowed the dense paste, coughing slightly. The doctor said my blood pressure spikes because my brain demands more oxygen to process the atomic blueprints. Exactly. All Might pointed a bony finger at him. So, we increase your cardiovascular health. We increase your muscle mass to store more glycogen. We turn your body into a battery that cannot be drained, and we do it by cleaning this beach. Izuku looked around at the towering mountains of trash. All of it? Every last screw, All Might grinned. But we are going to add a layer of complexity tailored specifically for you. Stand up, Izuku groaned, forcing himself to his feet. Your quirk requires concentration, All Might explained, his tone shifting into that of a seasoned tactician. In a controlled environment like your bedroom, you can build titanium shields and sonic emitters, but a battlefield is chaotic. It is loud. It is terrifying. You will be exhausted, bleeding, and running for your life. You must learn to access your mental blueprints while your body is under extreme physical duress. All Might pointed to a pile of rusted car engines. Your task for the next 3 hours, you will haul those engines to the truck. But while you do it, I want you to maintain the creation of a simple, solid object. A steel ball bearing, 2 inches in diameter, in the palm of your hand. If the ball bearing vanishes, it means you broke concentration, and you have to start the haul over. Izuku's eyes widened. Simultaneous physical exertion and sustained molecular creation? My brain is going to melt. It will feel like it, All Might agreed cheerfully. But muscles tear before they grow. The brain is neuroplastic. We will tear down your limits and rebuild them stronger. Now begin. Izuku took a deep breath. He held out his left hand. He pictured the atomic structure of standard carbon steel. He calculated the density, the volume required for a 2-inch sphere, and the ambient temperature needed to forge it. The familiar, agonizing pull tugged at his stomach. The blinding blue-white light flared in his palm, smelling of ozone and burning calories. When the light faded, a perfect, gleaming steel sphere rested in his palm. Instantly, a dull ache blossomed behind his eyes. Good! All Might barked. Now grab the rope with your right hand and pull the engine. Do not let the sphere dissolve. Izuku walked over to the rusted engine block. He hooked the carabiner to the chain wrapping it. He pulled. The sheer weight of the iron fought against him. His heart rate spiked. As his physical body demanded oxygen to fuel his muscles, his brain fought to keep the oxygen to maintain the steel sphere. The sphere flickered, becoming semi-translucent for a microsecond. The migraine flared aggressively. A warm drop of liquid fell onto Izuku's upper lip. He didn't need to look to know it was blood. He gritted his teeth, his vision swimming, and pulled harder. Steel. Iron and carbon. Atomic number 26. Maintain the matrix. Pull. Breathe. Maintain the matrix. Plus ultra, young Midoriya. All Might's voice echoed over the crashing waves. Push past your limits, month 4. The progression was grueling, bordering on masochistic. Izuku's high school uniform had to be replaced twice. He was no longer the scrawny, fragile boy who flinched at loud noises. Beneath his clothing, his body had morphed into a dense, heavily corded network of lean muscle. He wasn't bulky. Excess mass would hinder his mobility and consume too many calories just to maintain. He was built like a swimmer or a decathlete, efficient, resilient, and utterly relentless. His diet was terrifying. He was consuming upwards of 12,000 calories a day. Inko Midoriya had practically taken a second job just to afford the sheer volume of meat, rice, and specialized supplements he required. But the physical transformation was secondary to the mental one. It was raining sideways on Dagoba Beach. The wind howled, whipping freezing water against Izuku's face. He was currently carrying an entire dilapidated couch on his back, his boots sinking deep into the mud. In his left hand, glowing with a steady, unyielding blue-white light, he was no longer maintaining a simple steel sphere. He was maintaining a fully functional, continuously ticking grandfather clock, complete with swinging pendulum and interlocking brass gears. Heart rate is at 160 beats per minute. All Might called out from beneath an umbrella. How is the neurological strain? Manageable. Izuku shouted back over the storm. His nose was bleeding, the red washing away in the rain, but his eyes were wide, glowing with an intense, manic focus. The brass alloy matrix is stable. I've compartmentalized the gear ratios into my subconscious. It's like running a background application on a computer. Incredible, All Might whispered to himself. The boy's cognitive capacity was staggering. Most creation-type quirks required absolute, unbroken concentration. Izuku was actively rewriting his own neural pathways to multitask physical trauma and atomic engineering. Izuku dumped the couch into the back of the pickup truck. He released the quirk. The grandfather clock dissolved into blue light, vanishing into the storm. Izuku immediately doubled over, vomiting a mixture of stomach acid and water into the sand, his brain finally registering the sheer agony of what he had just done. All Might stepped forward, handing him a towel and a massive thermos of hot, calorie-dense soup. Drink. You've earned a 10-minute rest. Izuku accepted the thermos with trembling hands, downing the scalding liquid. He wiped his mouth, his emerald eyes locking onto the horizon. All Might, Izuku rasped, his voice rough. The entrance exam. I've been analyzing the previous year's data. The practical exam is always a mock urban battle. Villains represented by robotics. Points awarded for destruction. Astute, All Might nodded. UA favors combat prowess. It is a flaw in the system, but it is the reality of the test. Kaken is going to dominate, Izuku said, staring at his blistered hands. His explosions are perfectly suited for destroying stationary or slow-moving targets. If I just build weapons on the fly, I'll be too slow. A sword or a shield won't accrue enough points, and if I try to build a massive tank or something, I'll hemorrhage out of my nose and pass out in 3 minutes. So, what is the strategy, my boy? All Might asked, leaning forward. He loved these moments. Watching Izuku's mind work was like watching a master chess player see 12 moves ahead. Izuku reached into his waterproof jacket and pulled out a notebook. It wasn't one of his standard hero analysis for the future volumes. This one was bound in black leather, completely waterproof, and thick with intricate schematics. The cover read, Project Arsenal, UA Override. Izuku opened it to a heavily detailed spread. I can't build big. So I have to build dense. And I have to build smart, Izuku explained, pointing a bruised finger at a complex schematic. The heaviest strain on my quirk is the actual moment of creation, forcing the atoms into existence. Maintaining them is easier. If I build my gear at the very start of the exam and just wear it, I can bypass the continuous neurological shockwaves of creating weapons mid-battle. All Might leaned in, looking at the drawing. It looked like something out of a science fiction comic book. What am I looking at? I call it the Aegis exoskeleton, Izuku's eyes gleamed. It's an external framework. Carbon nanotube we've interlaced with pneumatic actuators. It will brace my skeletal structure and artificially enhance my physical strength and speed, utilizing ambient kinetic energy from my own movements to power the hydraulics. All Might blinked. You're going to build a robotic suit of armor. With your mind? Just a framework for my limbs and spine to keep it lightweight, Izuku corrected. Full armor would be too taxing. But I need offensive capabilities. That's where Project Artemis comes in. He flipped the page. The schematic showed a pair of sleek, brutal-looking gauntlets that covered the forearms. Electromagnetic railguns, Izuku whispered. Gunpowder is too volatile, and standard firearms lack the armor-piercing capabilities needed for heavy robotics. But electromagnetism? If I can create 2 parallel conductive rails and run an intense electrical current through them, I can accelerate a conductive projectile to hypersonic speeds using the Lorentz force. Where do you get the electricity? All Might asked, deeply invested. From the robots I destroy, Izuku smiled, a terrifyingly sharp expression. Or if needed, I convert my own bioelectricity, though that's a last resort. For ammunition, I don't want to waste mental bandwidth creating bullets. So I'm bringing my own. Izuku pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. He opened it, revealing dozens of dense, heavy tungsten ball bearings. Cheap store-bought. But accelerated through an electromagnetic corridor at Mach 3? They'll punch through reinforced steel like wet tissue paper. All Might stared at the boy. He felt a shiver run down his spine, a rare occurrence for the symbol of peace. If this boy had been born with a villainous heart, All Might thought, he would have brought the world to its knees before he was old enough to drive. Izuku, All Might placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Your mind is a weapon sharper than any sword. But remember, UA is not just looking for soldiers. They are looking for heroes. Do not let your calculations blind you to the heart of the battle. Izuku looked up, his expression softening. He closed the notebook. I won't, All Might. The math is just how I survive. Saving people. That's why I'm doing the math in the first place. Month 10. The morning of the exam. The alarm clock blared at 4 a.m. Izuku's hand shot out, hitting the snooze button with enough force to crack the plastic casing. He sat up, the sheets falling away from his torso. He walked to the mirror in his bedroom. The boy staring back at him was almost unrecognizable from the timid, stuttering child of a year ago. His chest and shoulders were broad, carved out of marble by the relentless torment of Dagobah Beach. A jagged, faded scar ran across his left bicep, a reminder of a rusted bumper snapping back under pressure. His eyes, however, were the most different. They were calm, piercing, calculating. He showered, washing away the sleep, and dressed in his standard middle school uniform. Over his shoulders he strapped a heavy, reinforced tactical belt with multiple pouches, filled to the brim with his tungsten ball bearings, a few high-density lithium batteries, and emergency calorie bars. He walked into the kitchen. Inko had prepared a breakfast fit for a lumberjack, a massive plate of steak, 6 eggs, 2 bowls of rice, and a protein shake. Izuku ate it methodically, treating the food not as a meal, but as raw ammunition. "You look so handsome, Izuku," Inko said, her eyes watering. "I'm so proud of you. No matter what happens today, you've worked harder than anyone." Izuku stood, wiping his mouth. He hugged his mother tightly. "Thanks, Mom. I'll be back before dinner." As he walked out the door, the cool morning air hit his face. He checked his phone. A text message from All Might: "The beach is spotless. The foundation is built. Now forge the castle. Plus Ultra." Izuku smiled, pocketing his phone. He began the walk to Yue High School. The campus of Yue was staggering. The main building was a massive, H-shaped structure of gleaming glass and steel, towering over the surrounding city like a monument to heroism. Hundreds of students were pouring through the gates, a sea of diverse quirks, colorful hair, and nervous energy. Izuku walked among them, his presence quiet but grounded. He was running final mental checks. Blood pressure is nominal. Caloric reserves are at maximum capacity. Cortisol levels are stable. Migraine severity is 0. "Out of my way, Deku." The voice was like grinding gravel. Izuku stopped, turning his head slightly. Katsuki Bakugo stood a few feet away, his hands stuffed in his pockets, glaring at Izuku with a familiar, burning intensity. Bakugo had also changed over the last 10 months. He was sharper, more aggressive, coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. "Good morning, Kaken," Izuku replied evenly, turning fully to face him. Bakugo stepped closer, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku. He didn't scoff. He didn't yell. That was what made it dangerous. "I don't know what kind of secret training you've been doing. You look different, but it doesn't matter. You can't build your way out of a war zone. I'm taking first place today. Don't die in there." Bakugo brushed past him, his shoulder intentionally bumping Izuku's. Izuku didn't budge an inch. He watched Bakugo walk away. "He's not just angry anymore," Izuku noted. "He's focused." "Good. It wouldn't be a true test if he wasn't at his best." Izuku turned to resume his walk toward the massive doors of the auditorium when he heard a sudden, sharp gasp. "Whoa!" A girl with a brown bob and a round face had tripped over an uneven paving stone. She was falling face first toward the concrete. Izuku's reaction time was a conditioned reflex. Distance, 3 meters. Fall trajectory, 45 degrees. Action required. He didn't run. He flicked his right wrist. The blue-white light pulsed in a microsecond flash. A localized, pneumatic gel pad materialized directly on the concrete beneath the girl's face. It was a simple creation, requiring almost zero mental strain. The girl's face hit the gel pad with a soft squish, bouncing slightly before she caught herself on her hands. The pad instantly dissolved into blue light, vanishing. She blinked, pushing herself up, looking at the empty concrete in profound confusion. "Huh! I didn't use my quirk. What was that?" She looked up and saw Izuku standing a few feet away, his hands still slightly raised, a faint wisp of ozone dissipating from his fingers. "Are you all right?" Izuku asked politely. The girl's face flushed a bright crimson. "Oh. Yes. Thank you. Did you make a pillow out of thin air? That's such an amazing quirk." She bounced on her heels, her anxiety seemingly evaporating. "I'm Ochiko Uraraka. I was so nervous I tripped over my own feet. It's a good thing you were here. or my nose would be flat. Izuku Midoriya, he introduced himself, offering a small smile. It was just a basic shock-absorbent polymer. Nothing too complex. Good luck in the exam, Uraraka. You too, Midoriya. She beamed, waving as she jogged into the building. Izuku watched her go. She has a gravity manipulation quirk, likely tactile based on the pads on her fingertips. Excellent utility. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and walked into the lion's den. The auditorium was massive, packed with thousands of hopeful applicants. Izuku sat in his assigned seat, perfectly upright, his hands resting on his knees. Bakugo was sitting a few seats down, leaning back with a scowl. On the massive stage, the voice hero, Present Mike, stood beneath the spotlight, striking a dramatic pose. For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my show today. Everybody say hey. Silence echoed through the massive room. Izuku was too busy mentally reviewing the tensile strength of his carbon nanotubes to reply. What a refined response. Present Mike laughed off the silence. Then I'll quickly present to you the rundown on the practical exam. Are you ready? Yeah. More silence. The screens behind Present Mike lit up, displaying a map of various urban testing centers. As it says in the application requirements, you listeners will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles. You can bring whatever you want with you. After the presentation, you'll head to the specified battle center. Izuku looked down at his examinee card. Battle Center B. He glanced at Bakugo's card. Battle Center A. They split up students from the same middle school to prevent cooperation, Izuku deduced. Logical. 3 different types of foe villains are stationed in each battle center. Present Mike continued, silhouettes of 3 different robots appearing on the screen. You earn points for each of them based on their level of difficulty. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to earn points by immobilizing the foe villains. Of course, attacking other examinees and any other unheroic actions are prohibited. Suddenly, a tall boy with glasses and perfectly combed blue hair stood up, his arm raised straight into the air like a rigid plank. May I ask a question? A spotlight hit him. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy suddenly turned, pointing directly at Izuku. In addition, you over there with the curly hair. You've been muttering this entire time. It's distracting. If you're here on a pleasure trip, then you should leave immediately. Izuku stopped muttering. He had been unconsciously whispering the chemical formula for ammonium nitrate. He looked at the boy with glasses. Izuku didn't flinch, nor did he apologize profusely. He simply stared back, his expression intensely analytical. Engine calves. Exhaust pipes protruding from the legs. Speed-based quirk. High rigidity in posture, indicating a strict adherence to rules. Likely from a disciplined, wealthy family? Ida family? Izuku raised his hand, pointing to the printout on his desk. If you read the addendum at the bottom of page 2, it specifies the 4th villain is an obstacle worth 0 points. My muttering was an active auditory recall technique to finalize my tactical approach. If my whispering from 4 rows behind you broke your concentration, I suggest you work on your battlefield auditory filtering. Villains rarely attack in silence. The auditorium went dead silent. The boy with glasses blinked, utterly stunned by the cold, surgical dismantling of his critique. He slowly bowed his head. I see. My apologies for the interruption. He sat down quickly. Bakugo snorted loudly from his seat. Nerd. Present Mike cleared his throat, clearly amused. Okay. Examinee number 7111 is correct. The 4th villain is the 0-pointer. It's an obstacle that will go crazy in narrow spaces. There's one in every battle center. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to defeat it either. I recommend you listeners try to avoid it. The screens changed to display the school's motto. That's all from me. Finally, I'll give you listeners a present, our school motto. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes." Go beyond. Plus ultra. Now everyone, good luck suffering. Battle Center B. Izuku stood before massive, towering metal gates that looked like the entrance to a fortress. Beyond the gates lay a sprawling, perfectly reconstructed replica of a modern city. Hundreds of other examinees milled around the entrance, stretching, looking nervous, or hyping themselves up. Izuku spotted Uraraka doing deep breathing exercises near the back. He also saw the boy with glasses, stretching his massive, engine-equipped legs. Izuku didn't stretch. He didn't need to. He needed to build. He walked to a secluded corner near the massive gates, out of the direct line of sight of most students. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs, his heart rate steadying into a calm, powerful rhythm. Project Arsenal. Phase 1, the Aegis exoskeleton. Material, carbon nanotube weave. Pneumatic hydraulic systems. Bioelectric receptors. Location, bilateral leg braces, spinal column support, bilateral arm bracers. Izuku pulled on his massive caloric reserves. The hunger hit him instantly, a sharp, twisting pain in his gut. But his body, trained by all might, didn't falter. It provided the fuel. A blinding, ethereal light erupted from Izuku's body, drawing the attention of several nearby examinees. "Whoa, what's he doing?" someone shouted. The light coalesced, solidifying around Izuku's limbs. Sleek, matte black metallic braces locked into place around his calves and thighs. A segmented, flexible metallic spine latched onto his back, connecting to shoulder harnesses. The migraine struck, a hot knife plunging into the front of his skull. Izuku gritted his teeth, suppressing a groan. Blood immediately dripped from his right nostril. He ignored it. Phase 2, Project Artemis. Material, high-density tungsten rails, electromagnetic capacitors, internal cooling vents. Location, forearms. The light flared again, brighter this time. Heavy, brittlest, gunmetal gray gauntlets formed over his wrists and forearms. 2 parallel rails ran down the top of each gauntlet, humming with a terrifying, low-frequency vibration as they tapped into his body's bioelectricity and the ambient static of the air. Izuku exhaled sharply, the light dying down. He wiped the blood from his nose with the back of his armored wrist. He flexed his hands. The pneumatic actuators in his legs whirred with a soft, mechanical hiss, taking the weight of the massive railguns off his natural muscles. He felt light. He felt lethal. "Right, let's start." President Mick's voice blasted from hidden speakers atop the walls. The massive gates began to slowly grind open. The other examinees were still staring up at the speakers, waiting for a countdown. "What's wrong?" President Mike yelled. "There are no countdowns in a real fight. Run, run! The die has been cast, you know." Izuku didn't wait. The second there was enough space between the gates for a person to fit, he activated the hydraulic thrusters in his calves. Boom! The concrete beneath his feet cracked as he launched himself forward, a black blur shooting through the gates while the rest of the examinees were still processing the start of the exam. "He's got a head start!" The boy with glasses yelled, his own engines roaring to life. "Follow him!" Izuku was already halfway down the main street. His tactical mind was scanning the environment, geometry, and sight lines. Target acquired. A massive, one-wheeled robot, a one-pointer, rolled around the corner, its red optic sensor locking onto Izuku. "Target locked," it announced mechanically. Izuku didn't break his sprint. He raised his right arm. He reached into his tactical pouch with his left hand, pulling out a single tungsten ball bearing. He dropped it into the loading chamber at the wrist of the Artemis gauntlet. The magnetic field caught the sphere, suspending it between the rails. Trajectory set. Electromagnetic charge at 40%. Izuku pointed his arm at the robot. Crack. The sound was like a thunderclap. A streak of blue lightning connected Izuku's gauntlet to the one-pointer. The tungsten sphere, accelerated to hypersonic speeds, didn't just hit the robot. It passed entirely through its center mass, tearing a hole the size of a dinner plate straight through the armored chassis and out the other side. The robot froze for a millisecond before violently exploding into a shower of sparks and shrapnel. "1 point," Izuku muttered, sprinting through the smoke. 3 more robots, 2 two-pointers and a 3-pointer, emerged from an alleyway to his left. Izuku slid on his knees, the exoskeleton absorbing the friction. He loaded 3 ball bearings into his left gauntlet in rapid succession. He didn't aim for center mass this time. He aimed at the concrete wall of the building next to them. Calculated ricochet. Charge at 60%. Crack. 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 He fired 3 shots in under a second. The recoil pushed him sideways, but the Aegis spinal brace absorbed the shock, preventing his arm from snapping. The 3 tungsten spheres hit the concrete wall, shattering it, and ricocheted at a perfect 45-degree angle, tearing through the sensory optics and neck joints of the 3 robots simultaneously. All 3 collapsed in a heap of sparks. 8 points. Izuku stood up, the pneumatic legs whirring as he broke into a sprint again. He was a machine designed to dismantle machines. He didn't waste time with flashy explosions or unnecessary destruction. He was surgical. He aimed for joints, power cores, and optics. Within 4 minutes, he had amassed 45 points. He paused on top of a crushed 3-pointer, gasping for air. The physical toll wasn't the issue. All Might's training had seen to that. But the neurological strain of maintaining the exoskeleton and the railguns simultaneously was taking its toll. The migraine was spreading to the back of his neck, and a second stream of blood began to flow from his left nostril. I need more calories, he thought, quickly pulling a nutrient bar from his belt and biting off half of it, chewing aggressively as he scanned the streets. Other students had finally caught up. He saw the boy with glasses, Ida, kicking the head off a 1-pointer with a massive swing of his engine leg. He saw Uraraka touching a 3-pointer, sending it floating into the air before releasing it to crash to the ground. Good. They're getting points, Izuku noted. But the spawn rate of the robots in this sector is dropping. I need to move closer to the center. High above the fake city, in a darkened observation room, the faculty of UA High School watched the monitors. In this practical exam, the examinees have not been informed of the number of villains or their locations. A small, bear-mouse dog creature, Principal Nizu said, sipping tea. They have a limited amount of time in a vast area. They have to draw the villains out. Information gathering ability to understand the situation before anyone else, a vampiric-looking hero, Vlad King, noted, gesturing to a screen showing a multi-armed student searching from the rooftops. Mobility that can be used in many different circumstances, the heroine Midnight added, pointing to Ida. Discernment to stay calm in any situation, the sniper hero Snipe commented. And pure combat ability, All Might said proudly from the back of the room, his eyes locked on a specific monitor. The screen showed Izuku Midoriya. He was currently airborne, having used the pneumatic actuators in his legs to jump 3 stories into the air. While upside down, he fired a railgun shot that decapitated a 2-pointer, before landing in a flawless roll and immediately shooting a 3-pointer through its power core. Who is that kid? The underground hero Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, asked, his eyes narrowing from within his capture scarf. His file says his quirk is Omniforge. A creation quirk, but he's moving like a seasoned mercenary. Where did he get military-grade exoskeleton tech and electromagnetic railguns? He built them, All Might said, unable to keep the immense pride out of his voice. Right at the start of the exam. From thin air, the room went completely silent. Several heroes turned to look at All Might. He built a functional railgun and a carbon nanotube exoskeleton from ambient energy? The hero ectoplasm asked in disbelief. The mathematical processing power required to visualize those atomic structures and execute them simultaneously would fry a normal human brain. Look closely, Aizawa said, pointing at the high-definition feed. The camera zoomed in on Izuku's face. He was pale, sweating profusely, and 2 steady streams of blood were trailing down his chin from his nose. His eyes were wide, strained with a terrifying level of concentration. He's hurting himself, Recovery Girl sighed, shaking her head. Such reckless use of a mental quirk. He's bordering on a cerebral hemorrhage. But his efficiency is flawless, Niza hummed, his black eyes gleaming with intense interest. He has 65 points. He's currently in first place, tied with the explosion boy in Center A. But look at his movements. He wastes no energy. Every shot is calculated. He doesn't destroy the robots. He simply neutralizes their operational capacity. He's a tactician. Niza walked over to a large red button on the control console. True heroism, however, is not just about scoring points when the odds are in your favor, Nisa said softly. Let's see how they react when the odds become insurmountable. Nisa slammed his paw onto the red button. 2 minutes remaining. Izuku had 72 points. He was exhausted. The Aegis exoskeleton was feeling heavy, the pneumatic fluid in the joints overheating from the constant use. The railguns were glowing red-hot, the internal cooling vents struggling to keep the metal from melting his own skin. He leaned against a building, swallowing a handful of glucose tablets. I have enough points to pass. I need to shut down the quirk before I pass out. The pain is reaching critical threshold. Suddenly, the ground began to shake. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was a violent, catastrophic earthquake. Buildings rattled, glass shattered, and the asphalt street cracked open. Izuku stumbled, using his heavy railguns to brace himself against the wall. He looked down the main avenue, rising from the center of the city, tearing through the buildings as if they were made of cardboard, was a monstrosity. It was larger than a skyscraper. It was a massive, heavily armored tank-treaded behemoth with a colossal humanoid torso. Its singular red optic glared down at the tiny humans below. The zero-pointer. Less than 2 minutes left. Present Mick's voice echoed. The other examinees took one look at the colossal machine and turned tail. Panic erupted. Run! It's the zero-pointer. Are they insane? That thing will crush us. It's an obstacle. Run away! Students sprinted past Izuku in a terrified herd. Izuku watched them go. His analytical mind, despite the agonizing pain in his skull, immediately assessed the threat. Armor composition, likely high-tensile titanium alloy. Mass, approximately 5,000 tons. My railguns would only dent the outer plating. The kinetic force required to stop it exceeds my current maximum output by a factor of 1,000. Logical conclusion, retreat. Izuku took a step backward, preparing to follow the crowd. I'll help. The voice was faint over the grinding gears of the massive robot, but Izuku heard it. He stopped. He turned his head. Through the dust and debris he saw her. The girl with the round face. Uraraka. She was trapped. A massive chunk of rubble from a destroyed building had fallen, pinning her right leg. She was struggling to push it off, but it was too heavy, and she looked exhausted, holding her stomach as if she was going to be sick from overusing her own quirk. The zero-pointer's massive, tank-treaded foot was raising into the air, preparing to crush the street she was trapped on. She's going to die. The thought was clear, cold, and utterly unacceptable. Izuku didn't think about his blood pressure. He didn't think about the migraine. He didn't think about his own safety. The image of All Might saving the people in the burning city flashed through his mind. A hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes. Izuku released the quirk. The Aegis exoskeleton and the Artemis railguns instantly dissolved into blue light, vanishing from his body. Without the artificial support, his exhausted legs buckled. He fell to his knees, gasping as the sudden absence of the neural load flooded his brain with a dizzying rush of relief. But he didn't stay down. He forced himself up, his raw, unenhanced muscles burning. He sprinted toward Uraraka. Midoriya? Uraraka cried out as he slid in next to her. What are you doing? Run! It's going to crush us. I'm not leaving you. Izuku gritted his teeth, grabbing the massive chunk of rubble. He pulled with all his might, his muscles bulging, but it didn't budge. It was too heavy. The shadow of the zero-pointer engulfed them. The foot was descending. They had 10 seconds. It's too heavy. Uraraka sobbed. Just go. Izuku stood up. He looked at the descending foot. He looked at the massive joints connecting the ankle to the leg. I can't destroy the whole robot. But I can destroy the joint. I need penetrating power. I need an explosive payload delivered directly into the internal mechanics. Izuku closed his eyes. He reached deep inside himself, past the exhaustion, past the pain, into the very core of his being. He envisioned the most complex, destructive piece of machinery he had ever conceptualized in his notebooks. Project Mjolnir. Anti-armor bunker buster. Material, depleted uranium tip. Solid rocket booster. Internal localized EMP warhead. He threw his right arm back. He pulled on every single calorie remaining in his body. His vision went completely black for a second. The blue-white light that erupted from his arm was not just bright, it was blinding. It illuminated the entire street, casting harsh, terrifying shadows against the descending foot of the zero-pointer. The air grew freezing cold as he absorbed all ambient thermal energy. Blood gushed from his nose, flowing over his lips and down his chin. His eyes, completely bloodshot, snapped open. In his right hand rested a terrifying weapon. It was a massive, shoulder-fired rocket launcher, intricately designed with cooling fins and a heavy digital targeting reticle. The tube was loaded with a custom-built, armor-piercing drill missile. Izuku hauled the massive weapon onto his shoulder. The weight of it threatened to crush his collarbone. He aimed up at the descending foot, directly at the primary hydraulic joint. "Eat this!" Izuku roared, his voice tearing his throat. He pulled the trigger. The recoil was catastrophic. The force of the solid rocket booster igniting dislocated Izuku's right shoulder instantly. He screamed in pain as the weapon vanished back into blue light to conserve energy, his body spinning from the force. The missile shot upward, a streak of white-hot fire. It struck the massive ankle joint of the zero-pointer. The depleted uranium drill tip engaged instantly upon impact, spinning at incredible speeds, burrowing violently through the titanium plating. Once it breached the internal housing, the secondary payload detonated. It wasn't a fiery explosion. It was a localized, high-yield electromagnetic pulse combined with a kinetic shockwave. A massive dome of blue static electricity erupted from within the leg joint. The circuits fried instantly. The hydraulic fluid superheated and exploded. The entire ankle joint of the zero-pointer violently detached from the foot. With its structural integrity compromised and its leg severed, the 5,000-ton behemoth lost its balance. It tilted backward, groaning like a dying whale. The immense weight of the robot pulled it down, crashing backward into the fake city in a devastating explosion of dust, concrete, and shattered metal. The shockwave blew Izuku and Uraraka backward, flattening them against the ground. Silence descended on the battle center. The colossal machine was dead. "Time's up." President Mick's voice echoed, breaking the silence. Izuku lay on his back, staring up at the artificial sky. The dust slowly settled around him. He couldn't feel his right arm. The migraine had transcended pain. It was a numb, buzzing static in his brain. He was entirely drained, his lipid reserves critically low. He turned his head slightly. Uraraka was staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute awe. You stopped it," she whispered. Izuku tried to smile, but his face was numb. "The rubble, is it off?" Uraraka looked down. The shockwave of the robot falling had jostled the rubble just enough. She pulled her leg free, wincing in pain. "Yes. I'm free. Thank you? Thank you so much." Izuku closed his eyes. "Good. Objective complete." He let the darkness take him. "Out of the way." "Let me through." Izuku vaguely felt something wet and slightly sticky touch his forehead. He opened his weary eyes to see a small, elderly woman in a doctor's coat leaning over him. Her lips were extended. "Recovery girl," Izuku mumbled, recognizing the school nurse. "Hush now, child," she scolded gently. "You've completely depleted your physical and mental stamina. A dislocated shoulder, dangerously low blood sugar, and severe capillary ruptures in your nasal cavity. You're a mess." She kissed his forehead. Her quirk activated, hyperaccelerating his body's natural healing process. The sharp pain in his shoulder vanished as it violently snapped back into place, but a wave of profound, bone-deep lethargy washed over him. He felt like he hadn't slept in a year. "Here," she said, motioning to a medical robot that rolled forward holding a tray of 4 bags and nutrient pastes. "Drink these immediately. You need to replenish your caloric deficit before your organs start shutting down." Izuku sat up slowly, accepting the paste. He looked around. The other examinees had gathered in a circle, whispering and pointing at him. "Did you see that? He had a rocket launcher. Where did he pull that from? He took down the zero-pointer in one shot. That's insane." Izuku ignored them. He saw the boy with glasses, Ida, staring at him with a complex expression of shame and respect. Ida realized that while he had run away, the boy he had insulted for muttering had stayed behind to save a life. Izuku finished the paste, standing up shakily. He bowed respectfully to Recovery Girl. "Thank you, ma'am." He turned and began the long walk toward the exit gates. He was exhausted. He was covered in dirt and blood. But he was smiling. He had forged his own path. He had built the weapons he needed. He had saved someone. Now, all he had to do was wait for the results. 1 week later, Izuku sat in his bedroom, staring at the small, circular metal device sitting on his desk. It had arrived in the mail an hour ago, stamped with the official UA wax seal. Inko stood in the doorway, chewing on her fingernails nervously. "Open it, Izuku. Whatever it says, I'm proud of you." Izuku reached forward and pressed the button on top of the device. A holographic projection shot upward, illuminating the dark room. "I am here as a projection." All Might's booming voice filled the room, his larger-than-life image grinning down at Izuku. "All Might?" Izuku gasped. "That's right, my boy. I have accepted a teaching position at UA High School," All Might announced. He cleared his throat, his expression becoming serious. "But we are here to discuss your results. You passed the written exam with flying colors. A near-perfect score. But the practical exam, that is where you truly shined." A scoreboard appeared next to All Might. "You scored 72 villain points," All Might said. "An incredible feat of tactical prowess and efficiency. You tied for first place in villain points with young Bakugo." Izuku's heart leapt. He had tied with Kaken. However, All Might continued, his smile softening. "This is a hero course. How could a hero course reject someone who saves others and does the right thing?" The screen shifted, showing footage of Izuku from the exam. It showed him dropping his exoskeleton. It showed him running toward the massive zero-pointer to save Uraraka. It showed the terrifying creation of the Mjolnir weapon and the subsequent destruction of the behemoth. A panel of judges was watching, All Might said softly. "And they award points for heroic actions. Rescue points," the scoreboard updated. Next to Izuku's name, a new number appeared. Rescue points, 60. Total points, 132. "Izuku Midoriya," All Might said, his voice filled with overwhelming pride. "You scored 132 points. You shattered the previous high score. You are in first place." Izuku stared at the number. 132. "You didn't just build weapons, my boy," All Might said, pointing a finger directly at the camera. "You built a future. Come, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia." The projection clicked off, leaving the room in silence. Tears finally spilled from Izuku's eyes. He buried his face in his hands, weeping with sheer, unadulterated joy. Inko rushed forward, hugging him tightly, crying right along with him. He had done it. Miles away, in the Bakugo household, Katsuki Bakugo was staring at a piece of paper that had been mailed alongside his acceptance hologram. It was the official leaderboard for the UA entrance exam. 1. Izuku Midoriya 132 points, 72 villain, 60 rescue. 2. Katsuki Bakugo 77 points, 77 villain, 0 rescue. 3. Eijiro Kirishima 74 points, 39 villain, 35 rescue. Bakugo's hands began to tremble. The paper crinkled in his grip as small sparks of explosive sweat ignited along his palms. He had been beaten. He, the prodigy, the king with the invincible quirk, had been crushed by more than 50 points. And he hadn't been beaten by someone with a stronger physical quirk. He had been beaten by the nerd with the bloody nose. He had been beaten by Deku. Bakugo stared at the name at the top of the list, his crimson eyes burning with a mixture of profound fury and an entirely new, terrifying emotion. Doubt. Deku. Bakugo whispered, the paper igniting into ashes in his hand. "What the hell did you build?" The alarm clock did not startle Izuku Midoriya. He was already awake. He lay in the darkness of his bedroom, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, running through the chemical composition of aerogels in his mind. Silica-based. High thermal insulation. Low density. If bonded with a flexible polymer matrix, it could provide maximum blast resistance without compromising joint mobility. He blinked, pulling himself out of the mental blueprint. Today was the day. His first day at UA High School. Izuku sat up, his body aching with a dull, familiar soreness. 10 months of hauling industrial waste across Dagoba Beach had fundamentally changed his physiology. He was no longer the fragile boy who bruised like a peach. His core was dense, his muscles tightly coiled like high-tension wire. But more importantly, his biological fuel tank was massive. He walked into the kitchen. Inko was already at the stove, humming nervously as she flipped a massive steak. The kitchen counter looked like a buffet line for a sports team. "Morning, Mom," Izuku said, taking a seat and immediately reaching for a bowl of calorie-dense oatmeal mixed with peanut butter and whey protein. "Good morning, Izuku," Inko smiled, placing the steak, 6 eggs, and a mountain of rice in front of him. "Are you nervous? Do you have everything? Notebooks? Pens? Your emergency glucose packets?" "I've got it all," Izuku assured her, methodically tearing into the steak. He chewed quickly, swallowing the protein and carbohydrates, treating it less like a meal and more like loading ammunition into a magazine. "My lipid levels are at 98% capacity. Blood pressure is normal. No lingering migraines from yesterday's training," Inko sighed, her smile softening into a look of deep maternal pride mixed with lingering worry. "Just promise me you won't push yourself too hard today. Your quirk is a miracle, Izuku, but you only have one brain. Don't fry it on your first day." "I'll be careful," Izuku promised, downing a glass of whole milk. 30 minutes later, wearing the stiff, pristine uniform of UA High School, Izuku stood before the towering doors of Class 1A. The door was absurdly large, undoubtedly designed to accommodate students with mutant-type quirks. He took a deep breath, compartmentalizing his anxiety, and slid the door open. The classroom was already lively. The first thing Izuku saw was the tall, bespectacled boy from the entrance exam, Tenya Ida, chopping his arms like a malfunctioning robot at Katsuki Bakugo, who was sitting with his feet propped up on his desk. "Remove your feet from that desk immediately," Ida demanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "It is disrespectful to your classmates, and to the great alumni of this institution." "Huh!" Bakugo sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Which crappy middle school did you crawl out of, you extra?" "I attended semi-private academy." "My name is Tenya Ida." "Semi, huh? So you're a damn elite." Bakugo grinned ferociously, small sparks popping off his palms. "I'm gonna have fun crushing you," Ida gasped, taking a step back. "Crushing me? Are you truly aiming to be a hero?" Izuku stepped fully into the room. The moment Bakugo's crimson eyes locked onto him, the fiery explosions in his palms ceased. Bakugo's arrogant sneer vanished, replaced by a dark, intense scowl. He slowly lowered his feet from the desk, his body tensing. He hadn't spoken a word to Izuku since the exam results were posted. Ida turned, following Bakugo's gaze. His eyes widened as he recognized Izuku. Ida immediately marched over, his posture ramrod straight. "You!" Ida announced loudly. "I am Tenya Ida." "I must apologize." "I heard," Izuku replied evenly. "I'm Izuku Midoriya." "There's no need to apologize, Ida. You were simply assessing the situation based on the parameters given." "No!" Ida bowed a perfect 90 degrees. "You realized the practical exam had a hidden rescue mechanic. You saw the true nature of the test while I ran away blindly. I judged you for muttering, but your tactical awareness is far superior to my own." "I concede defeat." "It wasn't a competition of awareness," Izuku said gently, slightly embarrassed by the volume of Ida's confession. "I just analyzed the structural integrity of the zero-pointer, and calculated I could destroy the ankle joint to save Uraraka. It was a mathematical necessity." "Oh! Midoriya!" Izuku turned to see Achiko Uraraka practically bouncing toward him, her round face flushed with excitement. "You got in! I'm so glad. I tried to talk to Present Mike after the exam to give you some of my points because you saved me, but he said you didn't need them. You were amazing. That giant rocket launcher you pulled out of thin air. If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your stuff and leave." The voice was tired, raspy, and entirely devoid of warmth. The entire class froze. Lying on the floor in the hallway, looking exactly like a giant yellow caterpillar, was a man in a sleeping bag. He slowly unzipped the cocoon and stood up. He had shaggy, unkempt black hair, heavy bags under his eyes, and a gray scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. He pulled a juice pouch from his pocket and took a loud slurp. It took you exactly 8 seconds to quiet down. Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough. He's our teacher? The class thought collectively. Izuku's eyes narrowed, running a rapid facial recognition algorithm in his mind against his internal database of pro-heroes. Scruffy appearance. Capture weapon made of carbon fiber and a special alloy wire. Goggles hidden beneath the scarf. Eraserhead. An underground hero. His quirk nullifies other emitter and transformation quirks via line of sight. A purely logical combatant. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Nice to meet you, the man deadpanned. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a stack of blue and white uniforms. Put these gym clothes on and head out to the training grounds. Now. The sun beat down on the massive dirt field behind the main UA campus. Class 1A stood in their gym uniforms, looking confused. A quirk apprehension test? The class shouted in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, her hands hovering nervously by her sides. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa said, turning his back to them. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. You kids have been doing these physical fitness tests since junior high, but you were never allowed to use your quirks. It's irrational. The Ministry of Education is procrastinating. Aizawa turned to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Bakugo replied confidently. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa pointed to a white circle painted on the dirt. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Bakugo stepped into the circle, rolling his shoulder. He grinned. He wound back his arm, his sweat glands working in overdrive. Dai! A massive explosion erupted from his palm as he hurled the ball, the shockwave ruffling the hair of the students standing 20 feet away. The ball vanished into the clouds, propelled by a perfect, directed blast of concussive force. Aizawa held up a digital device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. Know your own maximum first, Aizawa said, showing the screen to the class. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. 700 meters? Seriously? A boy with yellow hair featuring a black lightning bolt gasped. This looks like fun. A girl with pink skin and horns cheered. Aizawa's eyes darkened. A chilling aura fell over the field. Fun? You have 3 years to become heroes. Are you going to have an attitude like that the whole time? All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 events will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled as a logical ruse. The class erupted in panic. Expulsion? On the first day, Izuku didn't panic. He analyzed. A logical ruse. He's applying extreme psychological stress to force us past our self-imposed limiters. If we believe our futures are on the line, we won't hold back. Excellent motivational tactic. Event 1, 50-meter dash, Aizawa called out. Izuku lined up against Ida. Ida dropped into a perfect sprinter's stance, his engine exhaust pipes gleaming in the sun. Izuku took a breath. He needed to be fast. He needed to be efficient. Blueprint 14, aerodynamic microthrusters. Material, aluminum alloy casing. Compressed nitrogen propellant. Trigger mechanism linked to kinetic impact. Izuku pulled on his energy. A flash of blue-white light enveloped his lower legs. When it faded, 2 sleek, silver thrusters were clamped onto the back of his calves. What the, did you just build those? Ida asked, his jaw dropping. Ready. Go! The starting machine announced. Ida blasted forward in a burst of speed. Izuku stepped forward, slamming his heel into the dirt. The kinetic impact triggered the thrusters. A highly pressurized blast of nitrogen fired backward, launching Izuku forward like a bullet. He didn't run. He essentially hovered inches above the ground, using precise toe taps to maintain trajectory and trigger continuous bursts. Beep. 3.04 seconds, the machine announced for Ida. Beep. 3.12 seconds, it announced for Izuku. Izuku stood up, releasing the quirk. The thrusters vanished into blue light. I lost by 0.08 of a second. Ida's acceleration curve is incredibly steep. But a 3.12 is highly respectable. He wiped a single drop of blood from his left nostril. Creating machinery that intricate so casually was a flex, but a necessary one to show Aizawa his versatility. From the sidelines, a tall girl with long black hair tied in a spiky ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, was staring at Izuku with wide, deeply unsettled eyes. Her quirk was creation. She could create any non-living object from her exposed skin, provided she understood the atomic structure and had the lipids to fuel it. He just materialized compressed nitrogen thrusters through his clothing, Momo thought, her heart sinking. In less than a second. Without a blueprint. Without hesitation. His processing speed, it's monstrous. Event 2, grip strength. Izuku held the digital grip meter. A quick flash of light, and his forearm was encased in a heavy-duty, pneumatic hydraulic clamp, perfectly fitted to his hand. He squeezed. The metal groaned. 540 kilograms. A tall boy with 6 arms, Shoji, looked at Izuku's score, then at his own, 540 kilograms, and blinked in surprise. Izuku simply nodded at him, and dissolved the clamp. Event 3, standing long jump. Izuku stepped to the line. Blue light flared at his boots. Tungsten coil springs. He leaped, clearing the sandbox entirely and landing flawlessly on the grass beyond. By the time Event 5, the ball throw, arrived, Izuku was feeling the strain. He had created and dissolved 5 complex mechanical devices in the span of 30 minutes. His head throbbed with a rhythmic, dull ache. He had eaten 2 protein bars between events, much to the confusion of his classmates, but his blood pressure was undeniably elevated. His nose had bled twice more. It was his turn. Uraraka had just scored an infinity by removing the ball's gravity. Izuku stepped into the circle. He held the softball. I need a high score to offset my average performance in the seated toe touch. A localized railgun sling should provide sufficient initial velocity to breach the 700-meter mark. Izuku raised his arm, envisioning the electromagnetic coils, the capacitors, the heavy tungsten rails. The familiar warmth pooled in his stomach. The blue light began to spark at his fingertips. Suddenly, the light died. Izuku gasped, stumbling forward. A horrific, hollow sensation ripped through his mind. The blueprint, the crystal-clear 3D rendering of the railgun that lived in his head, violently shattered into static. It was as if someone had reached into his brain and unplugged his optic nerve. What? Izuku stammered, looking at his hands. Nothing was happening. The connection to his quirk was entirely severed. I erased your quirk, a dark voice said. Izuku looked toward the teacher. Aizawa's scarf was floating wildly in the air around him, defying gravity. His hair was standing on end, and his eyes were glowing a brilliant, terrifying red behind his unwrapped goggles. I saw the entrance exam, Aizawa said coldly, stepping toward the circle. You have a creation quirk of unprecedented complexity. But from what I can see, it requires immense neurological strain. You've been bleeding from the nose all morning. Furthermore, your creations act as crutches. Aizawa's capture scarf lashed out like a viper, wrapping tightly around Izuku's torso and pulling him close. You build a gun to shoot for you. You build boots to jump for you. What happens when a villain ambushes you and you don't have the 3 seconds required to conceptualize a weapon? What happens when your brain overheats and you pass out on the battlefield? A hero who relies solely on his gear is a liability. If you cannot fight without your toys, you cannot be a hero, Midoriya. Izuku stared into Aizawa's glowing red eyes. The erasure was absolute. He felt entirely human. Entirely average. But Aizawa was wrong about one thing. Izuku didn't just build weapons. He had built his body. 10 months of hauling industrial waste, of pulling trucks, of tearing his muscles apart under All Might's brutal regiment, had not been for nothing. Aizawa blinked. His hair fell flat. The red glow vanished. The scarf loosened. I've returned your quirk. Take your throw. Show me if you are anything more than a mechanic in a hero's costume. Izuku didn't immediately activate his quirk. He stood in the circle. He looked at his hands, heavily calloused from gripping iron chains. Aizawa wanted to see the man behind the machine. Izuku pulled his right arm back. He planted his left foot, dropping his center of gravity flawlessly. He didn't summon a railgun. He didn't summon thrusters. He tightened his core, utilizing the kinetic chain of his entire musculature. He rotated his hips, transferring the power up through his obliques, his lats, and finally his shoulder. With a roar that tore from his throat, Izuku threw the ball using pure, unadulterated physical strength. The ball cut through the air with a sharp whip sound, flying high into the sky in a clean, perfect parabola. Aizawa watched the ball fly. He looked down at his digital device. It beeped. 105.4 meters. It wasn't 700 meters. It wasn't an explosive display of supernatural power. But for a quirkless throw by a 14-year-old boy, it was a physical impossibility. The Olympic record for a baseball throw was roughly 130 meters, performed by grown men at peak physical maturity. Izuku had just breached the century mark through sheer, monstrous physical conditioning. Izuku turned to Aizawa, his chest heaving. He wiped the dried blood from his upper lip. My mind is the forge, sensei. But my body is the anvil. I don't rely on my toys. I command them. Aizawa stared at the boy. For a fleeting second, a terrifying, manic grin flashed across the underground hero's face before vanishing into his usual deadpan expression. He analyzed my critique instantly, recognized the flaw in my logic, and demonstrated physical prowess on par with low-level enhancement quirks, Aizawa thought. Problem child. Decent form, Aizawa muttered, turning away. Hey! Deku! What the hell was that? Bakugo was storming forward, explosions crackling in both palms, his face twisted in absolute fury. He had seen the entrance exam scores. He had seen the thrusters today, and now, he had seen Deku throw a ball 100 meters with just his raw physical strength. It broke every law of the universe Bakugo had grown up believing. Tell me what's going on, you damn nerd! Bakugo roared, lunging forward to blast Izuku. Before Izuku could even raise his hands to construct a shield, a gray blur wrapped tightly around Bakugo, snapping his arms to his sides. The explosions fizzled out instantly. What the? This cloth is stiff! Bakugo grunted, struggling against the capture weapon. It's a carbon fiber woven with metal wire woven from a special alloy, Aizawa said, his eyes glowing red again, erasing Bakugo's quirk. Stop making me use my quirk so much. I have dry eye. Aizawa released Bakugo. We're wasting time. Whoever's next, step up. As Izuku walked back to the group, Uraraka cheered softly, and Eden nodded in respect. But Izuku felt a burning glare on the back of his neck. Momo Yaoyorozu was watching him again, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He has the intellect of a supercomputer, the physical strength of a pro athlete, and a quirk that makes mine look obsolete, she thought, a bitter wave of insecurity washing over her. How can I compete with that? When the test concluded, Aizawa projected the results holographically. 1. Momo Yaoyorozu. 2. Shoto Todoroki. 3. Katsuki Bakugo. 4. Izuku Midoriya. Izuku sighed in relief. 4th place. Yaoyorozu's pure versatility with her creation quirk had allowed her to ace every test effortlessly without the neurological backlash Izuku suffered. Todoroki's ice was overwhelmingly powerful. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa announced, a creepy smile forming on his face. It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. The class, mostly, shrieked in shock. Of course it was a lie, Yaoyorozu sighed, touching her forehead. It should have been obvious if you just thought it through. Izuku glanced at her, offering a polite nod, but he internally disagreed. Aizawa wasn't lying. His heart rate didn't fluctuate, and his micro-expressions indicated total sincerity. He fully intended to expel someone if they didn't meet his standard. Mineta was lucky he scored well on the sidesteps. That's it for today, Aizawa handed out syllabi. Midoriya. Go to the nurse's office and have recovery girl check your nasal capillaries. You're leaking on my dirt. The afternoon brought hero basic training. The door to Class 1A slammed open. I am coming through the door like a normal person. All Might stood in the doorway, wearing his Silver Age costume, his massive cape billowing despite the lack of wind indoors. The class erupted into cheers and gasps of awe. "It's All Might! Wow, he really is a teacher!" Izuku smiled, a genuine thrill running through him. "Hero basic training!" All Might boomed, marching to the podium. "The class that will put you through all sorts of special training to mold you into heroes. And today, we're doing battle training." Bakugo's head snapped up, a feral grin spreading across his face. "Battle, and to go with that." All Might pointed to the wall, which began to mechanically slide open, revealing numbered briefcases. "Costumes made based on your Quirk registrations and requests you sent in before school started. Get changed and gather at Ground Beta." 10 minutes later, Class 1A stepped out of the tunnel into the faux city of Ground Beta. The costumes were vibrant, diverse, and heavily tailored to their quirks. Bakugo wore his aggressive grenade bracers. Uraraka was in a sleek, pink and black spacesuit-inspired outfit. Izuku emerged from the tunnel last. His costume was not flashy. It didn't have bright colors or a cape. It looked strictly militaristic and intensely utilitarian. He wore a dark green, cut-resistant Kevlar bodysuit that fit tightly to his athletic frame, avoiding any loose fabric that could be grabbed in a fight. Over the suit, he wore a lightweight, modular tactical vest loaded with pouches. Instead of a traditional mask, he wore a high-tech metallic collar around his neck that connected to a sleek, dark-visored half-helmet, leaving his hair free but protecting his eyes and ears. But the most notable features were the physical modifications designed to combat his quirk's drawbacks. Embedded into the collar and the temples of the helmet were small, silver heat sinks, designed to draw thermal energy away from his skull to delay the onset of his migraines. His utility pouches weren't filled with gadgets. They were filled with ultra-dense, 5,000-calorie gel packs. Finally, his forearms and shins featured magnetic docking ports, designed to seamlessly interface with any armor or weaponry he materialized. "Midoriya, your costume is incredibly practical," Ida praised, marching over in his massive white armor. "Thanks, Ida," Izuku said, adjusting a dial on his neck collar to activate the cooling system. A soft hum vibrated against his skin, bringing a wave of sweet relief to his throbbing head. "Function over form. If I look cool but pass out from heatstroke, I'm not a very good hero. They say the clothes make the man, young men and women," All Might announced. "Be fully aware, from now on, you are heroes. Now, let's see what you're made of." "The scenario is a 2-on-2 indoor battle," All Might explained the rules. "Villains guard a nuclear weapon inside a building. Heroes must either capture the villains or secure the weapon within the time limit." All Might drew lots from a box. Team A will be the heroes. Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. Izuku nodded at Uraraka, who gave him a determined thumbs up. "And Team D will be the villains. Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida." The air in the staging area suddenly grew heavy. Izuku turned his head. Across the group, Bakugo was staring at him. The murderous intent radiating from the blonde boy was so thick it almost distorted the air. Bakugo cracked his knuckles, the massive grenade gauntlets clinking together. "So, it's finally here," Izuku thought, his heart rate remaining steady, though the adrenaline began to pump into his veins. A direct confrontation. No holds barred. "Villains, go inside and set up. Heroes, you have 5 minutes to formulate a plan before you enter," All Might instructed. Bakugo didn't say a word. He turned and marched into the building, Ida following close behind, already lecturing him on the importance of villainous roleplay. Outside, Izuku pulled a black marker and a small whiteboard from one of his pouches. He crouched down, motioning for Uraraka to join him. "Okay, Uraraka, let's break this down," Izuku said, quickly drawing a rough schematic of the building's architecture based on a passing glance of the exterior structure. Bakugo's quirk is explosion. He secretes nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignites it. Ida's quirk gives him incredible linear speed, but his turning radius indoors will be severely handicapped. "Wow, you know a lot about them," Uraraka said, impressed. "I've known Kaken my whole life," Izuku said softly. "He is intensely prideful. He views me as an obstacle to his absolute superiority. Because of that, he will not stay with Ida to guard the weapon. He will abandon the objective and hunt me down immediately." "Wait, he'll just leave the bomb unguarded?" Uraraka asked. No, Ida will guard it. Ida is strict and takes rules seriously. He will fortify the weapon room, Izuku explained, tapping the whiteboard. So, here is the plan. We walk in together. The moment Kaken ambushes us, and I will engage him. You use that distraction to slip away, find the weapon room, and locate Ida. But Midoriya, Bakugo looked like he wanted to kill you. Uraraka worried. Are you sure you can fight him alone? Izuku reached into a pouch and pulled out a tube of calorie gel. He squeezed the entire thing into his mouth, swallowing the thick, artificially sweet paste. He wiped his mouth, his emerald eyes hardening into chips of cold glass. I'm not going to fight him, Uraraka, Izuku said, adjusting his cooling collar to maximum output. I'm going to dismantle him. Inside the building, Izuku and Uraraka stepped through a ground-floor window, entering a dark, concrete corridor. The building was a labyrinth of blind corners and tight spaces. Stay close to the walls, Izuku whispered, his eyes scanning the ceiling for structural weaknesses. Listen for the sound of sparks. They walked in silence for exactly 30 seconds. Izuku's acute hearing, trained to pick up the micro-vibrations of mechanical stress, caught a sound. Sizzle. Pop. It was coming from around the corner ahead of them. Uraraka, drop! Izuku barked. Bakugo launched himself around the corner, propelled by a massive explosion from his left hand. His right hand was drawn back, aiming a lethal, point-blank blast directly at Izuku's face. Deku! Bakugo roared. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He stepped into the blast zone. He didn't need to conceptualize a complex machine. He needed pure, unadulterated defense. Blueprint 04, hexagonal carbon lattice matrix. Graphene. Properties. 200 times stronger than steel. Exceptional thermal conductivity to disperse localized heat. In a fraction of a microsecond, a blinding blue light erupted from Izuku's right arm, locking into the magnetic docking ports on his forearm. A sleek, pitch-black, kite-shaped shield materialized. It wasn't thick, but it was molecularly perfect. Bakugo's palm slammed against the shield. Boom! The explosion ripped through the confined corridor, shattering the glass in the nearby windows and sending a shockwave of heat and smoke billowing down the hall. In the monitoring room, the rest of the class gasped. A surprise attack right from the start? Kirishima yelled. That's so unmanly. Is Midoriya okay? As the smoke cleared in the hallway, Bakugo's arrogant smirk vanished. Izuku was standing perfectly still. His boots had slid back 2 inches, but that was it. The pitch-black graphene shield was glowing a dull red from the heat, but it was entirely unblemished. The explosion had hit the shield, and the graphene had instantly conducted the 3,000-degree heat evenly across its surface, neutralizing the thermal damage while the kinetic force was absorbed by Izuku's heavily conditioned muscles. Izuku peered over the edge of the shield, his green eyes locked onto Bakugo's wide, shocked red ones. Reaction time, 0.2 seconds, Izuku stated coldly. Your right hook is too wide, Kaken. You always telegraph it by dropping your shoulder, you bastard! Bakugo snarled, leaping backward to put distance between them. Uraraka, go! Now! Izuku ordered. Uraraka scrambled to her feet and sprinted down the opposite hallway, leaving the 2 rivals alone. Bakugo didn't even look at her. His absolute focus was on the black shield attached to Izuku's arm.